Welcome to the SecureAF Podcast. I am Jonathan Kimmitt. I'm here with Phillip Wylie. We are going to be having a discussion. We're going to be continuing on our series about pen testing and its role in the organization. Last time we met, we were talking about how someone becomes a pen tester. Well, I really wanted to ask Phillip about how pen testing really helps the organization. You know, as a CISO, I look at pen testing from a very specific point of view because I want that information to help me make decisions. And he's a professional pen tester, so I really want to get his thoughts and ideas, and we're going to have this great conversation about this. So welcome, Phillip. Thanks for coming back.
Thanks for inviting me. It's great to be back.
Yeah. And we are in our new swag, so we're very proud of our sweatshirts. We were also taking pictures today, so hopefully those will be out on the website soon. Okay, let's talk about pen tests. Now, there is a difference, and maybe we need to start with that. Phillip, tell me the difference between red teaming, a red team engagement, and a penetration test. What is your kind of that, how do you look at both of those?
So they both kind of emulate threat actors or different types of attacks, but the pen test, you're looking for all the vulnerabilities that could be exploited and exploiting any of those vulnerabilities so you can see what happens. If you get a foothold, you're able to get a foothold in the system. What can you do next? What kind of data can you access? But with the red team exercise, a red team operation is more of an adversary emulation. So you're trying to see what you could do, that would emulate a breach. So you could simulate specific APT groups. Maybe your industry is the energy industry, and certain APTs target those. So you may find APTs along those lines that attack certain types of industries and base it off that, or just totally customize the scenario you're using. But one of the things too, you hear people that don't understand pen testing talk about going undetected. Pen testing is more of a time box test. So you got little time, so you really don't have time to mess with trying to go undetected. Whereas with a red team operation, there's a control group. Usually it's the CISO, and very few people actually have access to know or that there's a red team operation going on. Because part of that, you're testing the blue team, so maybe the blue team manager may want to tip off his guys because he doesn't want to look bad, doesn't want his team to look bad. And so usually you're looking for one way in and trying to see what you can get to, exfil data, so forth. But with a pen test, like I said, you're trying to find all the vulnerabilities. And a lot you're doing more things to leverage like social engineering and physical pen testing that normally isn't done during normal pen tests.
Right. Okay, well, that leads into a good question. Let's say you were going to pen test a company, just normal, let's say a manufacturing company, manufacturing oil and gas, just kind of a general, run-of-the-mill pen test. If I was the CISO that came to you and it's like, I would like to have a pen test, what would you give me? So what would you be relaying back to me as this is a standard level pen test? Here's the steps we're going to, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, however many you need. So tell me about that a little bit.
Sure. I would recommend internal and external pen test, and also include Wi-Fi, because with Wi-Fi, someone could hack your network from the parking lot. With the high-powered antenna on a network adapter, they could possibly hack you from a mile away or so. I used to do war drives, and the antenna I had was fairly powerful, but I was picking up signals from like a half mile away from some of these warehouses.
Yep.
So I would recommend the internal, external, and the Wi-Fi, which is technically kind of part of the external. That's where I would start. You should consider some applications, especially if they're internet facing.
Okay.
And you would also consider some of those internally. But that's kind of where I would start at. And so things like a red team operation, that's more when the organization is more matured.
Right.
After you've gone through a few iterations of pen testing and remediation, then you kind of shift to things like red teaming.
Sure. So kind of give me a breakdown of the difference between internal and external pen test.
Yeah, so internal is going to be actually on-prem access to that internal network. External is going to be outside of that network.
Okay.
From the internet.
Okay. A lot of companies want an external pen test because they want a compliance. They're trying to meet some compliance of some kind. And they may not have a very large presence, a presence on the outside of their firewall where you could hit from an external pen test. why is that dangerous? Why is it, if I'm a CISO, I'm just going for, I got to check that box, and an external pen test will do that. But why would you encourage me to look at the internal, the wireless, social engineering, all those different pieces?
Sure. One of the considerations to consider on internal that sometimes people don't think about is some of those vulnerabilities can be leveraged by threat actors with ransomware. So if you click on something, they're going to leverage different vulnerabilities to use that ransomware. So those are some instances there. There's also insider threats. You may have contractors coming on site. This company we used to get cyber threat intelligence from when I worked for this one company once, they came in and told us about China had implanted someone within this hardware manufacturer that was stealing intellectual property. So this is someone that's got authorized access to this stuff and able to exfiltrate it more easily and not be as suspicious as someone that's trying to break in.
Right. Now, I mean, that's kind of the worst case scenario, is have an insider threat that has full access to be able to deposit, that sort of thing on your network. But wouldn't an external, again, CISO, I'm just asking questions, wouldn't an external capture most of my stuff? I mean, that insider threat, I can definitely see somebody trying to rationalize, like, I know all of our people, I trust all of our people. I'm just really worried about that, that Chinese hacker coming in and getting in our stuff. What do I really need to think about? How do I need to change my mind as a CISO?
Yeah, you need to do external as well, but the internal piece and other threat vectors are Wi-Fi networks. If someone's able to gain access from the internet, social engineering, someone sends an email with malware on it. It clicks on it. What can happen? How can they get further from that? A lot of companies are doing these phishing campaigns, and one of the things I'd like to discuss later on in the show is some of the gaps that people miss because they're not pen testing properly, not getting all the coverage and using all the different types of techniques. But, malware, if someone clicks on that, what happens? They can gain access to inside. So that doesn't necessarily, it's kind of an external approach, but those vulnerabilities internally are going to be leveraged to get further foothold and access to items in that environment.
Sure. All right. I definitely want to get to those gaps because I'm really, interested in those. But let's talk about the difference in terms of resources. I mean, you have external, you have wireless, and you have internal. Do you think that is 3 times the effort of an external, or is it more? I mean, it sounds kind of like an internal pen test is more involved because you have much more surface area to test and to attack. And wireless, I mean, it's wireless. It's all over the place, and you gotta, So what are we looking at in terms of the amount of resources I need to throw at a situation from a pen test point of view to be able to get a good understanding of my risk level?
Yeah, one of the things too is the external, of course, is not going to take as long because not much attack surface. And as a pen tester, usually you're not finding as much externally as we used to. People are getting a lot better about locking things down. So an internal pen test is going to take longer. Some of my previous consulting jobs normally it'd be like 40 hours max to do external. And internal, sometimes you could get away with 40 hours of internal pen testing if it's not too large of an enterprise. But as the companies get bigger, it could take more weeks than that. And one of the things to look at too is, as doing it as a consultant, usually we don't get as much time as an internal resource.
Yeah.
So when I worked for a bank as a pen tester, we had 4 weeks compared to the 40 hours I would have had as a consultant because it gets a little more expensive to do, a lot of hours. But usually you can take care of most things in like that 40 hours or so.
Yeah.
Find anything that's really sticks out there, really risky.
Now, I'm going to step back out of the interviewer mode because when I was CISO and I brought in the team to come in and do the pen test for me, I was paranoid. I wanted everything. I tried internal, external, social engineering. They did wireless. And I wanted them. My environment that I was in was very cyclical. There was certain times of the year that things were different. Summer versus fall and spring because we're higher education. So the pen test effectively took about 7 months. because I wanted them to get a snapshot of different time frames when there was a lot of people on campus, when there wasn't a lot of people on campus, and all these different things. Do you think that's a good idea? I mean, it's not just the 40 hours. It may be 40 hours 3 times a year. I mean, because you have to really understand the ebb and flow of the business.
I think that's a good idea. And I think in general, some people's business, there's the level of traffic and activity stays the same. But I even think in those instances that you need to do it more frequently. I'd say ideally, if you have the budget, I would say at least pen test quarterly, because once a year I did a pen test once where there was a 90-day retest. And it was interesting because the customer did a good job on remediation. They remediated the criticals, the highs, and the mediums, and maybe even and I'm trying to think. I think one of the findings that we had originally discovered was a low, but in that 90 days there was a exploit created for that vulnerability. Yeah. So if it hadn't been for that retest, then it would have been a year before they tested again. So some of the things I see out there too that's a good option is continuous pen testing. So if you're able to continually test that environment, and that's where vulnerability management helps too. So if you're doing this reoccurring scans on a regular basis, you're going to find some of the CVEs and hopefully remediate and reduce those risks.
Yeah. And, we do, for various clients, we do that sort of thing because and I would say to some extent, a continuous pen testing, throughout the year, you have an open-ended and not open-ended contract, but you have a contract for the full year to test at any time. That can be both for a very mature organization who not only wants to check for vulnerabilities and check for problems on their networks, but also to test their people, to test their SOC, test their security groups, or test, because you want them to be able to stop the threats or see the threats and be able to report those. And you never know when those attacks are coming in. That's the whole point of that continuous pen testing. It's just, the other benefit is as we find something in one organization, we can go back and try it in this other organization. It's like, we can get in that vulnerability. Let's go try it in the continuous pen testing clients and see if we can see if that new vulnerability has shown up there. So I think that's a really great option for people. I would say, again, it's probably for that more mature, because like you said, you really need to get that pen test done, and you need to fix the problems that are found, and then testing again, and then remediate, and test it again, or remediate. So, that's a good point of view. Let me ask you, you talked about gaps earlier. If we're doing pen tests, and I'm a CISO, what are some of the gaps you regularly see that CISOs need to change, that we need to ask for something different, or we need to allow to happen from the pen test point of view to help cover some of our risks?
Sure. And kind of before I get into that, is compliance pen testing really helped grow the market. So a lot of companies weren't doing pen testing before it was a requirement. So it brought awareness. So it's done more often. But one of the problems and what causes gaps there is, okay, you've got these 1,000 IP addresses you're testing, and a lot of cases, like internal pen testers and sometimes contractors or consultants, may not really do a lot of reconnaissance or OSINT on those targets. You got these 1,000 IPs, you're just running your Nmap scans or your Nessus scans, your different vulnerability scans against those targets, and not doing OSINT, because I was doing a black box pen test for this company once. And it was it was an interesting pen test because we were trying to go undetected. So it was almost a combination of a red team operation and a pen test, because they wanted the depth. And so we were doing the pen testing part. But I sat there and looked up, we only had the physical address because we're testing the physical security of the corporate office. So that was the only details we had. So we had to do reconnaissance to collect the IP ranges, the domains, the subdomains. I was looking through all that stuff and not really finding anything. But then I went through Shodan and started looking, and I found an FTP server in Indonesia, which is clear text authentication in Indonesia, that got missed. Now, if we would have had like a set scope, maybe they would have had that information there, but sometimes they get missed. So if it wasn't for doing the OSINT, I would have missed this device. And how I detected is Shodan looks for like the login banners, the warnings you get on your computer when you log in, saying you must be authorized, and how you could be terminated or whatever if you're doing activities that you don't have the rights to do or whatever. And so that's kind of how I found this. So that's one of the things that I think over the years, the scopes being so well defined that, not much reconnaissance is going on and people are missing out on the OSINT piece.
Yeah. So I want to step back to the compliance pen testing, because one of the things that I look at as CISO in my job is the intent of the compliance. Yeah. And there's a lot of compliances that do require you to have a pen test. Let's look at PCI or a variety of different ones. But the intent is to say, okay, as an organization, you need to have someone come in and do a penetration test on your organization to help you do a risk assessment. I mean, that's the whole point of this. And a lot of people, again, just get the basics done to be able to check that box, but they're not actually checking the box. And I know we're not really specifically talking about compliance, but it is not okay for you to get something very basic done and thinking that that covers you on that compliance. So I think CISOs out in the world, and we're going to have a podcast here soon about the SEC and SolarWinds and their CISO, and about some of the things they did. And I think that that's going to change people's minds from a CISO's perspective about what you do and how you do it in terms of evaluating those risks, covering those gaps, not just doing a compliance pen test, but really the compliance wants you to go and have a pen test, but have a real one. Actually have them come in and evaluate your environment the right way and give you a list of risks and recommendations for remediation, because that's the only way you're really going to truly understand what risk level you're at in your organization. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox there. But it really is important, because I'm sure you see it too, that they call up once a year and they say, hey, we need to get our pen test this year. Okay, well, yes, we can absolutely do that, but are they getting the real value out of it? So what are some of the things that I need to think about as a CISO to get that full value? What would you recommend? What do I need to focus on?
Yeah, first of all, whenever the consulting company you work with will hopefully go past the just, what are we doing this pen test for, and do a good job setting the goals. So that's something you need to do. Work on what goals that you're trying to get out of this pen test outside of just, compliance. And another thing too, some of the gaps I see with these types of testing is no social engineering. And you look at most of these attacks, a lot of the footholds from ransomware gangs is usually social engineering. They're sending some kind of phishing email with malware. Someone clicks on it, they get a foothold in the environment. And companies are using these automated phishing campaign tools where someone on the help desk or entry-level folks on the security team are running these canned phishing campaigns. And it's good for social awareness, not saying doing away with that. I think there's a place for it, and you should do it for awareness to keep people on their toes.
Sure.
But the thing it's not doing is it'll tell you when people click on a link, but it's not going to show you what happens if it's malware. What is possible from there? Are your endpoints preventing any kind of, spread of infection with malware, or either threat actors being able to get lateral movement into the environment, gain access to your valuable data? So you need to make sure that you're testing for those type of items too, as well.
Now, I would say that from the organization's perspective, if we're doing our risk assessments correctly, all of those things should be as part of your risk register, or just your list of risks that you're going to deal with, such as the social engineering. And we were just talking about this in the hallway a few minutes ago. Social engineering family members, because that is a real risk. In fact, we had Tanner and I, who was one of our other engineers, we had a huge conversation where we talked about attacking families, or attacking avenues that wasn't that normal. Okay, we're going to attack this web server that's hardened and it's got a web proxy on it, or a web application firewall, and that's hard. I mean, hopefully that's hard. That's the whole point of implementing the security controls. Let's go after the easy stuff. Let's go after the spouses and the kids, personal phones. when organizations allow bring your own device, they may not be managing those devices. So absolutely, I would assume that this is a huge target for attackers because it's probably not maintained. It's probably not patched. It probably doesn't have the same security controls as you would have in an organizational device. So we really should be looking at all of these risks, understand what these risks mean to the organization, and then bringing someone in to help us pen test those. I mean, would you agree?
Yeah, I agree. I actually worked for an organization that, like the CISO and some of the C-level executives, there was a security assessment done of their home.
Yeah.
Testing their firewalls. They gave them like enterprise-grade routers for at home that were like small office type routers, and set up that securely, and they would do a security assessment just to see what was possible there. But I think that's a great idea because especially now with all the work from home has become more popular. Some people are doing some level of work from home. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah. And we've got a couple of different versions of that. So we do, I can't think of what they're called now, but it's a security assessment of people's homes, of executives or high-risk individuals. But we have a pen test that we do for organizations that includes everything from the internal, the external, social engineering, wireless, all that stuff. But it also includes family members or spouses or third-party vendors or any way possible to get into the organization. But we get a lot of people say, "Oh no, don't do that. Don't attack my wife. You can't do that. Don't go after phones. Can't do that." And it's like, well, but that's how the attackers are going to do it. How do you know what the risks are if you don't test this? And then otherwise put remediation in, put in MDM for controls, put in security awareness training, put in attack awareness training, all these different things. So I think hopefully that is changing. We've had more and more customers who have asked us for that. And actually it's more and more customers who allow us to do that because we want to do it. We want to try to get that full 360 degrees of attack vector coming into the organization. And that includes all of those pieces. So I'm hoping it's changing. Now, one of the things that I'm seeing on the compliance side is the compliances know organizations aren't doing the right thing. So they're saying, no, you have to do this right. I said it the other day, the designated qualified individual for GLBA. Well, there's a reason why they want them qualified. And the SEC and the new thing, that's another thing of qualified. Should someone who is qualified be asking for these things to cover their gaps, to cover their risk? And yes, that's what they want. That's what the compliances want. That's what we want as an industry. So, okay, I'm CISO, I'm oil and gas, or I'm manufacturing or whatever. I'm going to come to you and say, okay, I really don't know what risks I have. What are those? Give me 4 things that you're going to tell me of entry points of attackers or things that you're going to be able to test for me that I may not know, that I'm like, oh, I would have never thought of that. So we know about web applications or file the servers that are online or ODP online. But what are a couple of things that people really don't think about that right there, that is a way in that they didn't think about it.
Well, one of the things we've discussed already is the people. That's usually the weakest link. So social engineering, even like supply chain, making sure whoever you're doing work with, that you get like a copy of, or maybe redacted copy of their pen test to show that they're secure. Because you look at like Target, that came in through the HVAC company. So you'll make sure, that your the different companies you deal with, the supply chain is secure. I think we need to really focus on that type of stuff. And then the physical security too, I think that gets overlooked so many times, because if someone gets in a data center, gains access to a system that's logged in, it doesn't take a lot of skill for someone to hack into that. And a lot of cases, people kind of make threat actors to sound a lot more sophisticated than what they are. You hear a lot of times these kids or people just being curious, finding an open S3 bucket somewhere, or there's information stored at like a lower level access that should be, and it's not as difficult as people would think. So that's kind of making sure you're taking care of all your hygiene, all your basics, making sure all those things are covered and not overlooked when you're securing your environment.
Yeah. I love doing physical stuff. And that's kind of my background, background in physical security and such. So that I kind of gravitate to because I enjoy it. It's fun. But it still amazes me, because of my background in security, physical security, law enforcement and such, that people don't check doors. They don't check physical processes. They don't check those things because, why put technical controls in when someone can just walk right into your data center? They get into the door, they get into the main door, and they find the loudest room with fans, and thunk, and they're in. So I think that's a huge piece. We do a lot of physicals, and that's kind of our standard, internal, external, physical, our three pieces that we do. And there's not a lot of people out there that do physicals.
Yeah, I agree.
And first of all, it's fun. I enjoy doing that stuff. I'm usually doing it from the organizational perspective. So for vCISO, I'm going to walk around and I'm going to show them how I'm going to break in the doors, all these things. But from a physical attack, why is that dangerous? What if you were able to get in through a physical means, into a back door, into a side door, even just walking right into the lobby? What could you do? How would that benefit you as a pen tester?
Yeah, you're able to gain access to systems. Maybe if not that, maybe you can find a network drop that you're able to plug in. That in a lot of cases, people take drop boxes and plug in, or rubber duckies, a different type of hardware hacking devices, and plug in to gain access. Because that's a lot of cases what they do, just try to get that initial access. Maybe there are some conference meeting rooms outside in the lobby, but it's easier for someone just to walk in.
Yep.
And gain access. I was doing a pen test once, and physical was included in it, and we were able to tailgate behind someone, get in a conference room, and sit there and pen test away all day long, and not being noticed and questioned. And that brings up a good point for physical security. I really think some of the smaller offices really underestimate needing physical security. I think corporations, companies of all sizes, don't think about that. You may have a small office somewhere, but this was a office for a major company, but this location wasn't that large.
Yeah.
But there were no cameras on the doors. People really weren't being careful with letting people in, because I got in earlier and I had to go to the restroom, and I was coming back, and I was worried about trying to get back in. I'd left through the break room. As I was coming back, someone was leaving, and they said, "Hey, do you need in here?" Yes. And they didn't even ask for a badge or anything, and walked right in. People by nature are usually pretty trusting.
Yeah. That's what we were trained.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things is I got this, I was on a site visit 2 days ago, and it was vCISO stuff, but we were talking about this, and one of the questions I always get when I talk about some of these attacks is, why would they do that? And I love that question because they can. In this particular one, we were talking about it was a web server that kind of had open access. You could upload files. And my question was, well, what if they uploaded either malicious content or illegal content, like child porn or whatever? Do you have any alerting set up? Do you have anything to let you know that people have uploaded this? And the first question is like, why would they do that? Like, because they can. Maybe they want to run a reputation. Maybe they thought it was funny, whatever. But it's still things you have to clean up. You have to fix that problem. So physical fitness is kind of the same way. I remember I got into a department once, and I was late, and I was in a hurry. And the person who was sitting at the desk says, "Can I help you?" And I say, "Nope," and I walked right past them. They didn't alert security. They didn't say anything. They didn't stop me. They didn't let their supervisor know. They didn't do anything. Now, I was in a suit and tie, and maybe I looked like I belonged there, but their job was to be that barrier. And I was walking in, and, "Can I help you?" "Nope." And I walked right around them, and they didn't do anything. Now, I did go back later after I was done, and I talked with them. I was like, "Hey, here are some things that you could do. Number one, don't just stay sitting, stand up. When you stand up, you get people's attention, you draw them to you, instead of saying, 'Can I help you?' ask, 'Who are you here to see?' or something like that, but where people have to respond not in a yes or no fashion. anyway, we're not talking about physical attacks, but that is a very common way to get in. You just walk in. So that's, again, we're talking about gaps. That's a lot of organizations don't think about that. They don't think about someone just walking in and sitting down in a conference room and plugging in. So, okay, well, that's a great topic. And I think that from all the people that we deal with, all of our clients, all of our CISOs, everybody who is otherwise working in this industry, they really need to think about that stuff. So what's the final thing you would say to the CISOs out there? Yeah, we're getting to the end of the podcast. We're around about 30 minutes now. What would be that? Well, I guess I should ask you, are there any other gaps that you want to talk about, or anything else you want to make sure that the industry knows and can really get in their minds that they need to think about?
Yeah, I think the main thing is just not limit the types of testing. So make sure you're doing the social engineering, physical in there.
Yep.
And other things too is the good opportunities too is assume breach type tests where you got some level of credentials.
Yes.
Because if you sit there and you're trying to expect, your pen tester comes in, they can't get initial foothold, maybe they can't get an environment. It doesn't mean you're secure. Going back to insider threats.
Yep.
What if someone has access? What if someone's got their username and password written down on a sticky note under their keyboard? Yep. Someone finds it, or they find credentials somewhere and gain access, so you need to test it from unauthenticated stance. That way, it's kind of the same way you do authenticated pen testing on a web application. You don't want to just try to see if you can break in and leave it at that. You want to test the different levels of access because, administrators don't need to see social security numbers and stuff. And so you just want to check the different types of information being leaked or what can be done to these different levels of access. So assume breach is a good addition to the pen testing.
Yeah. No, I agree 100%. So CISOs, keep that in mind. Any IT leader, anybody IT or IT security, use your pen tests as a tool to help you gauge your risk. Don't limit them. Let the pen testers help you understand those entry points and those problem areas you have, because if you don't know, you can't fix them. And speaking of compliance, you can't say you can't use the excuse of you didn't know as a reason if something bad were to happen. They generally call that negligence. Again, we're going to have another podcast here pretty shortly, hopefully the next week or so, that specifically talks about negligence from a CISO side, from an organization side. So please stay tuned for that. Phillip, thanks for stopping by again with us, and it was a lot of fun talking with you. And everybody else, you have a wonderful rest of the week, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.